The morning they lowered my mother into the ground, my father looked relieved. Not grieving, relieved. 3 weeks later, Celeste moved into our home, sleeping in my mother's bed. When I refused to call her mom, he threw a duffel bag at my feet with my clothes already packed inside. "If you can't handle it, get out." I was 17, alone, homeless. They thought they'd erased me from existence. The inconvenient daughter, the living reminder of a woman they wanted to forget. What my father never anticipated was that 8 years later, I'd be standing in a courtroom, facing him not as his broken child, but as the lawyer who would dismantle everything he'd built. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but justice? Justice burns like fire. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And, if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning of my mother's funeral was exactly as bleak as it should have been. Cold, rainy, and as gray as the ashes they'd give us later. I stood there in a black dress that hung too loose around my shoulders, watching raindrops slip down the polished mahogany of her casket. But what struck me most wasn't the weather or the finality of that box. It was my father's face. Alan Whitmore didn't look devastated or even properly sad. He looked relieved. "She's at peace now," people kept saying, patting my arm, but I knew the truth. The only one at peace was him. I caught his eye across the cemetery as they lowered Mom into the ground. He looked away first. 5 days later, I came home from school to find a strange woman sitting at our kitchen counter, drinking coffee from my mother's favorite mug, the one with little purple flowers that Mom said reminded her of the wildflowers near her childhood home. The woman had glossy dark hair and red lipstick that seemed too bright for a house still in mourning. "You must be Vivian," she said, her voice sweet in a way that felt practiced. "I'm Celeste. Your father and I work together." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and retreated to my room. That night, I heard laughter from downstairs, my father's deep chuckle mixing with her lighter one. I pressed my pillow around my ears and tried to remember when I'd last heard him laugh with Mom. Within a week, Celeste's clothes were hanging in the master closet. Her perfume replaced the lingering scent of my mother's shampoo in the bathroom. Her car was parked in our driveway each morning when I left for school. She'd moved in so quickly it felt like she'd been waiting in the wings, marking time until the spotlight was hers. Dad started smiling more, not at me, barely at me, but at her, around her, because of her. And somehow, that felt like the worst betrayal of all. "Vivian, we need to talk about household expectations," my father said one evening as we sat down to dinner. Celeste had made some fancy pasta dish that smelled amazing but tasted like nothing in my mouth. "Celeste is part of our family now." I stared at my plate, pushing noodles around with my fork. "It's been 3 weeks, Dad." "Life moves on, Vivian." His voice took on that edge, the one that warned me I was testing his limits. "We have to move with it. Your father has been through so much," Celeste added, reaching over to touch his hand. "We all need to support each other now." I looked up, meeting her perfectly made-up eyes. "And how exactly were you supporting him while my mother was dying?" My father's fork clattered against his plate. "That's enough. I just think it's interesting how quickly you found a replacement," I said, the words burning my throat on their way out. "Did you even wait until the funeral flowers wilted, Vivian?" My father's face flushed dark red. "It's okay, Alan," Celeste said softly. "She's grieving. We need to be patient." "Don't talk about my grief like you understand anything about it," I snapped. "This has to stop," my father said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet tone. "Celeste deserves your respect. I expect you to treat her as part of this family, as your mother now." The room went silent. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting out the seconds of this new, terrible reality. "My mother is dead," I said, each word like glass in my mouth. "You don't get to replace her with your whatever she is. This isn't a request, Vivian. This is how things are going to be. You will call her Mom, and you will show her proper respect under my roof." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I will never call her that. Never." "Sit down," my father growled. "We're not finished." "I think we are. If you can't handle the real world, Vivian, then get out." He stood up too, towering over the table, his face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. He stormed from the dining room and up the stairs. I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Celeste dabbed at her mouth with a napkin, not meeting my eyes. My father returned minutes later and threw a duffel bag at my feet. Some of my clothes spilled out onto the floor. He'd already packed for me. "Dad," I whispered, the words strangled in my throat. "I'm 17. "Then act like it," he said coldly. "When you're ready to be a part of this family, the way it is now, you can come back." I looked at Celeste, waiting for her to intervene, to say this was going too far. She just looked down at her plate. I picked up the bag with shaking hands and walked to the front door. I kept waiting for him to stop me, to call me back. The door closed behind me with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than if he'd slammed it. Outside, the evening air cut through my thin sweater. I had nowhere to go. I tried my best friend, Mariah's, house first. We've been inseparable since elementary school. Surely her parents would let me stay for a few days until things cooled down. Her mother answered the door, her smile fading when she saw my tear-streaked face and the duffel bag. "Oh, Vivian, honey, I'm so sorry about what you're going through, but we can't get involved in family disputes," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We have college visits this weekend, and frankly, Mariah needs to focus on her future right now. Having you here would be a disruption." The door closed. I stood on their porch for a long moment, the word disruption echoing in my head. I texted Mariah, but she never responded. 8 years of friendship, erased in an instant. That night, I slept in the park shelter, the one where Mom used to take me for picnics when I was little. The wooden bench was hard, and every sound in the darkness made me jump. I huddled in my jacket, hunger gnawing at my stomach, shame burning in my chest. How had I become homeless in the span of a few hours? I couldn't stop the thoughts spinning through my head. What if he never let me come back? What about school? My college applications? How would I eat tomorrow? The questions piled up until I couldn't breathe around them. When dawn broke, I was still awake, shivering, my eyes swollen from crying. I walked to the public restroom to splash water on my face and try to make myself look normal. Not homeless, not abandoned. You look like you've had quite a night, said a gentle voice behind me. I spun around to see an elderly black woman watching me with kind but shrewd eyes. She wore a bright purple beret and carried a canvas tote bag full of books. I'm fine, I said automatically. And I'm the Queen of England, she replied with a soft smile. I'm Eleanor Park. I used to run the library across from the high school. Now I just come to feed the birds and read in peace. She paused, studying me, and occasionally help young women who shouldn't be sleeping in parks. I burst into tears, humiliating, gulping sobs that I couldn't control. She didn't try to hug me or shush me. She just waited, offering a clean handkerchief from her pocket. My father kicked me out, I finally managed to say. She nodded as if this was exactly what she'd expected to hear. I have a spare room. Well, more of an attic space, really. It's yours if you need it. Temporarily. I stared at her, suspicious through my tears. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I know enough, she said simply. I know that child services would have a field day with a minor sleeping rough, and I know that system doesn't always help the way it should. I also know that you're wearing a Central High sweatshirt, which means you're nearly done with school. It would be a shame to derail that. Her home was small but immaculate, bookshelves lining every wall, the scent of cinnamon and old paper in the air. The attic room had a twin bed, a small desk under a window, and more books stacked neatly in the corners. I have 3 rules, Eleanor said as she showed me where to put my things. First, you finish high school, no excuses. Second, you apply to college, at least 3 schools. Third, you don't waste your mind on hate. I looked at her, confused by the last rule. Anger is fuel, she explained, but hate is poison. There's a difference. That night, she gave me a leather-bound journal and a good pen. Write it all down, she said. Everything you feel, everything you remember. Your mother's kindness, your father's failings, your own dreams, words of power, especially the ones we write for ourselves. I filled 10 pages that first night, my handwriting jagged with emotion. I wrote about my mother's laugh, the way she used to tuck my hair behind my ear when I was studying, how she fought the cancer until she had nothing left to give. I wrote about my father's betrayal and Celeste's smug smile. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes burned. A week after I moved in with Eleanor, I took a detour on my way home from school. I walked past my old house, staying on the opposite side of the street. Celeste's red car sat in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see that the family photos on the mantel had been rearranged. My bedroom window, visible from the street, now had pink curtains instead of the blue ones my mother had made. I stood there until the sky darkened, watching the home that wasn't mine anymore. Then I turned and walked away, not looking back. The transition to Wilson High was brutal. Where Central had been all manicured lawns and college prep, Wilson was metal detectors and peeling paint. But it was the only school in the district that would take me mid-semester without asking too many questions about why I suddenly lived with someone who wasn't my legal guardian. I kept my head down, did my work, and sat in the back row of every class. I didn't make friends. I didn't join clubs. I existed in a state of suspended animation, alive but not living. Miss Whitmore, my government teacher, Miss Vale, called on me one day during a class debate about the Fourth Amendment. You haven't contributed. What's your take? I've been half listening, but something about the student speaker's smug certainty about police search rights irked me. Before I could stop myself, I was on my feet, dismantling his argument point by point, citing 3 Supreme Court cases he'd conveniently ignored. When I finished, the room was silent. Miss Vale looked at me with new interest. Well, she said, it seems we have a natural debater in our midst. After class, she asked me to join the debate team. I refused. Why not? She asked. You clearly have the talent for it. I don't have time. I lied. Bull, she said bluntly. You have the time. What you don't have is the courage. I flinched as if she'd slapped me. You don't know anything about me. I know you argue like someone who's been silenced before, she said more gently. Like someone with fire inside, looking for a place to burn clean instead of burning out. That night, I told Eleanor about Miss Vale's offer. Sounds like a good woman, Eleanor said. Smart enough to see what you're hiding under all that quiet. I'm not hiding anything, I muttered. Eleanor just raised an eyebrow and went back to her crossword. I joined the debate team the next day, and though I'd never admitted to Miss Vale, it saved me. For the first time since my mother died, I had somewhere to direct all the words burning inside me. Between debate practice and maintaining my GPA, I barely had time to think about my father. But late at night, in Eleanor's attic, I'd pull out college brochures and law journals I'd smuggled from the school library. I traced my fingers over glossy photos of law libraries and courtrooms, something like hope flickering in my chest. You argue like a woman with fire, Ms. Vale told me after I won my first tournament. Not just with logic, but with conviction. That's rare. I applied to 12 law programs in secret, writing essays late into the night while Eleanor slept downstairs. I never told her how many schools I'd applied to, only that I'd followed her rule about the minimum 3. One Saturday, I ran into Celeste at the grocery store. I froze by the produce section, hoping she wouldn't see me. She was with another woman, both of them laughing as they examined avocados. "It's been so much better since Alan's brat finally disappeared," Celeste said, her voice carrying clearly across the aisle, though he had the nerve to ask if I thought we should check on her, as if I care where she landed. "Did he really throw her out?" the friend asked, sounding scandalized but thrilled by the gossip. "Well, she left on her own, technically." Celeste shrugged. "But good riddance. Now I don't have to look at her judging me every day with those eyes, just like her mother's." I abandoned my half-filled basket and left the store, my chest tight with fury. But something had shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was determined. I would make something of myself, and someday, they would regret underestimating me. The state debate championship came in the spring. My topic was wrongful termination and workers' rights. As I delivered my closing argument, I spotted Miss Vale in the audience, tears streaming silently down her face. I won first place. That same week, I received my first college acceptance letter, then another. And another. By the April, I had my pick of schools, several with partial scholarships. I chose Hamilton University's pre-law program, 3 states away from my father and everything he represented. When I showed Eleanor the acceptance letter, she wept, not delicate tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that startled me. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "It's just, I'm so proud of you, child. So proud." The night before I left for college, Eleanor brought down an old leather suitcase from the attic closet. "This was my husband James," she said, running her hand over the worn leather. "He was a good man. A teacher. He believed in potential, in seeing what someone could become, not just what they were at their worst moment." She pushed the suitcase toward me. "You carry our hopes with you, Vivian. Mine and his." I hugged her fiercely, this woman who had saved me when no one else would. The first year at Hamilton nearly broke me. The workload was crushing, the competition cutthroat, and the other students seemed so much more prepared. I failed my first mock trial so spectacularly that my professor suggested I reconsider my career aspirations. I called Eleanor in tears, ready to quit. "So quit," she said calmly. "What? I wasn't expecting that. If one failure is enough to make you give up, then quit now. Save yourself the trouble." "I thought you'd tell me to keep going," I said, hurt by her bluntness. "Why should I need to tell you that?" she asked. "Either the fire is yours or it isn't. No one can stoke it for you forever." I hung up angry, but her words lingered. The next day, a girl from my constitutional law class approached me in the library. "I'm Daphne," she said, dropping her books next to mine. "You look like you were about to cry or commit murder in class yesterday, and honestly, both are valid responses to Professor Michaels. Want to study together?" Daphne Costa became my first real friend since Mariah. She was brilliant, relentlessly positive, and completely unimpressed by the cutthroat atmosphere of pre-law. She helped me stay afloat when I thought I might drown. "You need to stop trying to be perfect," she told me one night as we crammed for finals. "Half these people are only here because their daddies paid for it. You earned your spot. Own it." During spring break, while most students went home or to beaches, I visited the local courthouse. A wrongful eviction case caught my attention, an elderly woman being forced out of her apartment by a development company. I attended every hearing, taking detailed notes, watching how the woman's attorney fought for her. For the first time in months, I felt that fire inside me burned clean and bright. 3 years later, I landed a coveted summer internship at Lockbridge & Bell, a prestigious firm known for its civil rights litigation. My days consisted of endless coffee runs, document filing, and observing depositions from the back of the room. But I loved every minute of it. The urgency, the precision, the sense of purpose. "Whitmore, I need you to organize these intake forms," Sarah Bell, one of the senior partners, said one afternoon, dropping a stack of folders on my desk. "New cases, potential conflicts of interest checks." I nodded and began sorting through the paperwork. Halfway through the stack, a name caught my eye. Eleanor Moore versus Whitmore Ventures. My hands froze over the folder. Whitmore Ventures, my father's company. I flipped open the file. Eleanor Moore was a 78-year-old widow suing Whitmore Ventures for property fraud. According to her statement, she'd been pressured into signing over her family home while heavily medicated after surgery. The development company had claimed they were just updating her mortgage paperwork. At the bottom of the complaint was my father's signature, Alan Whitmore, CEO. The same signature that used to appear on my school permission slips and birthday cards. My heart raced as I slipped the file into my bag. After work, I stayed late, using the firm's resources to dig deeper into Whitmore Ventures. What I found made me sick. Dozens of similar cases, elderly homeowners, predatory contracts, illegal evictions, and a trail of bribed housing officials, all under my father's direction. All since he'd taken over the company 5 years ago, right around the time my mother got sick. I printed everything I could find, my hands shaking with rage and, something else, a terrible clarity. This was why I'd gone into law, not just to rebuild my life, but to fight men like him. When I got back to my apartment that night, there was a letter waiting for me. Eleanor's handwriting on the envelope. I tore it open, expecting her usual mix of encouragement and tough love. Instead, I read, "My dear Vivian, The doctors tell me I don't have much time left. Cancer, like your mother. Isn't that a cruel joke? I didn't want to tell you until your internship was over. You need this opportunity, and I won't have you rushing back to play nurse for an old woman. I am so proud of who you've become. That fire I saw in you has grown into something magnificent. Whatever happens after I'm gone, remember this. You were never thrown away. You were planted, and look how you've grown. All my love, Eleanor. I cried for hours, clutching the letter to my chest. Eleanor. The only family I had left was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The next day, I called Daphne in a panic. She graduated a semester early and was already working at a family law practice in the city. I need your help, I told her, my voice still raw from crying. It's about my father. We met at a coffee shop near her office. I laid out everything. The Eleanor Moore case, my father's company, Eleanor's letter, and the terrible symmetry of it all. Daphne listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker. There's more, she said when I finished. I did some digging after you called. Celeste Evans, she was your father's assistant before she became his wife, right? I nodded, feeling a familiar twist in my stomach at the mention of Celeste. Well, according to public records, she had a baby about 7 months after your mother died. Your half-sibling, I guess. He didn't waste any time, I said bitterly. That's just it, Daphne said, leaning forward. The timing doesn't add up. If they only got together after your mom died, the baby would have been premature. But there's no record of Nikki's stays or complications. Viv, I think Celeste was pregnant while your mother was still alive. The world tilted sideways. My father hadn't just replaced my mother. He'd betrayed her while she was dying. While we were all sitting in hospital rooms watching her waste away, he was starting a new family. There's something else, Daphne continued, her voice gentler now. I found financial records for a joint charity your parents established, the Catherine Whitmore Memorial Fund for Cancer Research. Your father has been systematically draining it for years, funneling the money into Whitmore Ventures. He named a charity after her and then stole from it. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. I need proof. Already working on it, Daphne said. But Viv, you need to be careful. This goes beyond family drama now. If even half of what we suspect is true, your father could face serious charges. Back at the firm, I couldn't focus. The Eleanor Moore file seemed to burn through my desk drawer. I should turn it over, recuse myself due to the obvious conflict of interest. But something stopped me. During my lunch break, I visited Judge Arthur Grimshaw, a semi-retired jurist who occasionally consulted for Lockbridge and Bell. He'd known my mother. They'd served on a hospital board together years ago. Judge Grimshaw, I said, sitting across from him in his cluttered office. I need advice. I told him everything, who my father was, what I discovered, and my impossible position. You know you can't handle this case yourself, he said when I finished. The conflict of interest is massive. I know, I said, deflating. But, he continued, eyes twinkling, you could work with someone who can. As a research assistant, perhaps, off the books. Is that ethical? I asked. Ethical? He laughed. No, but neither is what your father's done to these people. Sometimes justice needs a little creative interpretation. That afternoon, Sarah Bell called me into her office. My heart sank. She must have discovered I'd taken the Moore file. Vivian, she said, gesturing for me to sit. I've been impressed with your work this summer. Thank you, I said cautiously. So impressed that I'd like to offer you an associate position after graduation. It's unusual, but your professors speak highly of you, and we could use someone with your drive. I blinked in surprise. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she smiled, but there is one condition. I noticed you took an interest in the Moore case. That needs to go to someone else. We can't have even the appearance of personal vendettas at this firm. I stared at her. You know who I am. I make it my business to know everything about potential hires, she said simply. Your connection to Alan Whitmore is a liability in this case. Drop it, and the associate position is yours. It should have been an easy choice. The position at Lockbridge and Bell was everything I'd worked for. Security, prestige, a path forward. But all I could think of was Eleanor Moore, Eleanor's letter, and my mother's charity, pillaged by the man who claimed to love her. I'm sorry, I said, standing up. I can't do that. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You're turning down the position? I'm turning down the condition, I said. I want justice, not titles. I walked out of her office, knowing I'd just torched the biggest opportunity of my career. But for the first time in 8 years, I felt truly like my mother's daughter. That night, I called Eleanor Moore and introduced myself. I want to represent you independently, I told her, and I think you should know who you're working with. There was a long silence after I explained who my father was. Well, she finally said, her voice warm and weathered, isn't that a twist of fate? I think we'll work together just fine, Ms. Whitmore. The courtroom felt both smaller and larger than I'd imagined. Smaller in its physical dimensions, larger in the weight of what was about to happen. I adjusted my navy blazer, smoothing invisible wrinkles as Eleanor Moore settled beside me at the plaintiff's table. The gallery behind us filled with reporters and curious onlookers drawn by the unusual nature of the case. You look pale, Eleanor whispered, her weathered hand covering mine briefly. Remember to breathe. I nodded, keeping my eyes on my neatly arranged files. I didn't want to look up until I absolutely had to, until I could face him with all my armor in place. The bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Winters presiding. As we stood, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. I knew it was him before I turned. Some part of me, that abandoned 17-year-old girl, could still feel his presence like a cold draft. Alan Whitmore strode in, flanked by 3 attorneys in expensive suits. He looked older, his hair more silver than brown now, but still carried himself with that same confident authority that had once seemed so impressive to me. Celeste followed close behind, her hand protectively on her rounded stomach, pregnant again, apparently. Our eyes met across the room. His narrowed slightly, recognition giving way to something harder. Confusion, then anger, then a cold, calculating assessment. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me. Celeste recognized me a moment later. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide how her face drained of color. She clutched at Alan's arm, whispering urgently. He shook her off, his expression settling into a mask of indifference. Judge Winters called the court to order, and I forced myself to focus on the case, not the churning emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Eleanor Moore versus Whitmore Ventures. Property fraud and elder abuse. The facts, not the family drama. The opening statements, when as expected, my careful outline of the deception practiced against an elderly widow, the defense's dismissal of Eleanor as confused and opportunistic. I kept my voice steady, my arguments precise. I didn't mention my connection to the defendant. That revelation would come soon enough. During the first recess, I headed to the restroom to splash cold water on my face. As I exited, Alan was waiting, blocking my path. What exactly do you think you're doing? His voice was low, meant only for me. My job, I replied, hating how my heart raced. Representing my client. This is what you became. Someone who uses the courts for personal vendettas. I looked at him directly, forcing myself not to shrink under his gaze. Interesting, you'd assume this is personal. It suggests you know your company's actions were wrong. You'll lose, he said, stepping closer. And no one will believe a bitter little girl trying to punish her daddy. I'm not that little girl anymore, I said quietly. And you're not my daddy. You made that very clear 8 years ago. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I gave you a choice. You chose to leave. You threw my clothes at me in a duffel bag. I corrected him. I was 17. You were impossible, he snapped. Just like your mother. Always judging, never understanding what it takes to build something, to protect what matters. Is that what you told yourself while she was dying? While you were sleeping with your assistant? His face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. You know nothing about my life or my choices. I know enough, I said, echoing Eleanor's words from all those years ago. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a case to win. Back in the courtroom, Eleanor took the stand. She was magnificent, clear-eyed, and dignified as she described how representatives from Whitmore Ventures had visited her hospital room hours after her hip surgery while she was still heavily medicated. They said they were just updating my mortgage paperwork, she testified. I could barely read the documents, but the young man, she pointed at one of Alan's associates, assured me it was routine. 2 weeks later, I received an eviction notice. They'd had me sign over my deed. Alan's lead attorney, Brandon Williams, tried to discredit her during cross-examination. Mrs. Moore, isn't it true that you've had memory issues in recent years? That your own daughter suggested assisted living. My daughter lives in Arizona and visits once a year, Eleanor replied crisply. And occasionally forgetting where I put my reading glasses is quite different from forgetting I signed away the home my late husband and I paid off 30 years ago. A ripple of appreciative laughter ran through the courtroom. Even Judge Winters' mouth twitched. The next day, Celeste took the stand as a character witness for Whitmore Ventures. She painted a glowing picture of the company's community involvement and Alan's personal integrity. Everything was perfectly rehearsed until I began my cross-examination. Mrs. Whitmore, I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. You testified that you've been involved with Whitmore Ventures for approximately 7 years. Is that correct? Yes, she said confidently, since shortly after Alan and I became involved. And when was that exactly? She shifted slightly after his first wife passed away. So you weren't working as his executive assistant while Catherine Whitmore was still alive? Well, yes, I was his assistant, but our relationship was strictly professional until after. Yet in your deposition last month, you stated you began working for Mr. Whitmore 5 years ago. I interrupted, sliding the transcript across to her, which would be 2 years after Catherine Whitmore's death. Celeste flushed. I misspoke in the deposition. Did you misspeak just now as well? Because both statements can't be true. Objection. Williams called out. Relevance. Mrs. Whitmore is here as a character witness for the defendant, I explained to the judge. I'm establishing that her testimony is inconsistent and therefore unreliable. Judge Winters nodded. Overruled. The witness will answer. Celeste's mask slipped, revealing a flash of the calculating woman beneath. I don't see what my employment dates have to do with this case. Let me be clearer then, I said, approaching the witness stand. You've testified about the integrity of Whitmore Ventures based on your close association with the company. I'm questioning the accuracy of that association, and by extension, your credibility as a witness. By the time she stepped down, Celeste's testimony was in tatters. As she returned to her seat, I caught her whispering furiously to Alan, her face tight with fury. The next day brought a surprise I hadn't anticipated. Miss Vale, my old debate coach, arrived to support me, sitting directly behind our table. Seeing her familiar face, older now, her dark hair streaked with silver, gave me a surge of confidence. But that confidence wavered when the defense called their next witness, Professor Harlow, my constitutional law professor from Hamilton. He testified that I had shown disturbing obsessive tendencies and a troubling fixation on cases involving family disputes. Objection. I stood so quickly my chair nearly toppled. This testimony is irrelevant to the case at hand. On the contrary, Williams argued smoothly, Miss Whitmore's psychological state is directly relevant when considering her motivations in bringing this case. I didn't bring this case, I countered. Mrs. Moore did. I'm merely her counsel. Judge Winters considered for a long moment. I'll allow limited testimony regarding counsel's professional conduct, but tread carefully, Mr. Williams. This isn't a trial of Miss Whitmore's character. Later, Daphne slipped me a note. Harlow received a $50,000 research grant from Whitmore Ventures last month. Just found the transfer. Two could play this game. The next morning, I filed a motion to introduce new evidence. A DNA test. Your Honor, I addressed the court. In the course of investigating Whitmore Ventures' business practices, evidence emerged of personal impropriety that speaks directly to the defendant's pattern of deceptive behavior. Williams was on his feet instantly. Objection. This is clearly a fishing expedition designed to embarrass my client. I'm not interested in embarrassment, Your Honor. I'm establishing a pattern of fraud and misrepresentation that extends beyond business practices. Judge Winters frowned. Approach the bench, both of you. At the sidebar, I explained in hushed tones, DNA evidence indicates that Mr. Whitmore's first child with Celeste Evans Whitmore is not biologically his, despite his name on the birth certificate and his public acknowledgement of paternity. This speaks directly to the kind of deception Mrs. Moore experienced. Documents misrepresented, signatures obtained under false pretenses. The judge studied me for a long moment. I'll allow it, but Miss Whitmore, I'm watching you very carefully. This had better be relevant to the fraud case. When we're turned to our tables, Alan was staring at me with undisguised hatred. I'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. This wasn't just legal anymore. It was war. The cross-examination duel with Alan's lead counsel was brutal. Williams was skilled, aggressive, and determined to discredit both me and Eleanor. Isn't it true, he demanded, that you specifically sought out this case because of your personal vendetta against Alan Whitmore? I didn't seek out this case, I replied calmly. Mrs. Moore was already a client at Lockbridge and Bell when the connection became apparent. And you didn't immediately recuse yourself? That seems like a clear ethical violation. I did remove myself from the Lockbridge team. I corrected him. I'm representing Mrs. Moore independently with full disclosure of my connection to Mr. Whitmore. Williams smiled thinly. And, what exactly is that connection? Perhaps you should enlighten the court. Here it was, the moment I'd been both dreading and waiting for. Alan Whitmore is my father, I said, my voice steady. He disowned me when I was 17, shortly after my mother's death. I haven't spoken to him in 8 years until this week. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Williams looked pleased, as if I'd walked right into his trap. So, you admit this is personal? That you're using this court to settle a family grudge? What I'm doing is seeking justice for an elderly woman who is defrauded by company with a documented pattern of predatory behavior, I replied. My personal history gives me insight into the defendant's character, but this case stands on its legal merits. Williams changed tactics, producing a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence regarding Miss Whitmore's mental health history. My blood ran cold. Objection. My medical history is privileged and irrelevant. Not when you were treated for obsessive behavior and delusional thinking, Williams countered, and not when you've inserted yourself into this case in a clear conflict of interest. Judge Winters frowned. I'll review this evidence in chambers before ruling on its admissibility. During the recess, I sat alone in a conference room, my hands shaking. They had fabricated a mental health report. There was no other explanation. I'd never been treated for anything beyond the occasional stress headache. Daphne burst in, her face flushed with excitement. We got him. The second DNA test came back. It's conclusive. The child isn't his. It won't matter if they convince the judge I'm mentally unstable. I said numbly. They won't, she assured me. I've been doing some digging on Williams. He's been involved in evidence tampering before. Nearly got disbarred 5 years ago. I filed a motion questioning the authenticity of their mental health report. Plus, I've got 3 of your professors ready to testify about your exemplary character and academic record. The afternoon session was delayed as Judge Winters reviewed both the mental health report and our challenge to it. When court finally reconvened, her expression was thunderous. The alleged mental health report will not be admitted, she announced. Furthermore, Mr. Williams, I'm referring this matter to the Bar Association for investigation of potential evidence fabrication. She turned to me. Ms. Whitmore, you may proceed with your closing argument. I stood, gathering my notes, but then set them aside. I knew what I needed to say. Your Honor, this case is about trust and betrayal. It's about powerful people exploiting vulnerable ones. It's about documents that say one thing but mean another, signatures obtained through deception and lives upended by greed. I glanced at Eleanor, then at my father. Mrs. Moore trusted the representatives of Whitmore Ventures when they came to her hospital room. She trusted that they were telling the truth about the papers she was signing. That trust was betrayed, just as the trust of dozens of other homeowners was betrayed through similar tactics. I took a deep breath, studying myself. Some might argue that this case is clouded by personal history. I won't deny that I know Alan Whitmore in a way few people do. I've experienced firsthand his capacity for abandonment and his skill at rewriting narratives to suit his needs. But this case isn't about my story. It's about Mrs. Moore's. It's about her right to keep the home she's lived in for 40 years, the home where she raised her children and mourned her husband. I looked directly at the jury, no longer avoiding anyone's gaze. Trust is easily broken, but justice doesn't have to be. Today, you have the power to say that signatures obtained through deception aren't binding, that vulnerable people deserve protection. That truth still matters, even when powerful people try to bury it. When I returned to my seat, Eleanor squeezed my hand. Miss Vale nodded approvingly from the gallery. And Daphne, sitting behind our table, gave me a subtle thumbs up. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing hallways, drinking bitter coffee, and trying not to make eye contact with my father and Celeste across the waiting area. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs felt like water. We stood as the jury filed in. The foreman handed a slip of paper to the judge, who read it impassively before returning it. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Winters asked. We have, Your Honor, the foreman replied. In that moment of suspension, between question and answer, between past and future, I closed my eyes briefly. Whatever happened next, I had done everything I could. I had spoken the truth. I had fought for someone who needed fighting for. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Eleanor Moore. The words washed over me like rain. We'd won. The aftermath was both anticlimactic and overwhelming. Judge Winters ordered Whitmore Ventures to return Eleanor's deed, pay damages, and cover all legal costs. More significantly, she referred the case to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation of fraudulent business practices. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. Eleanor handled them with grace, but I hung back, still processing everything that had happened. Through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of my father sitting alone on a bench, his head in his hands. As I watched, he clutched at his chest, his face contorting in pain. Dad. The word escaped before I could stop it. A security guard rushed to his side. Call an ambulance, someone shouted. He's having a heart attack. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. He wasn't my responsibility anymore. He hadn't been for 8 years. And yet, Celeste pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of panic. When she saw me watching, her expression hardened. Haven't you done enough? She spat. I turned away, letting the paramedics do their work. Later, I learned he'd suffered a panic attack, not a heart attack. The stress of the trial and its implications for his business had finally broken through his armor of certainty. The news coverage was immediate and unflinching. Disgraced tycoon exposed by estranged daughter. Father-daughter courtroom showdown ends in fraud investigation. Whitmore empire crumbles under weight of deception. I hated how they framed it, as if I'd orchestrated the whole thing as revenge. As if Eleanor's case was just a subplot in my personal drama. But I couldn't control the narrative any more than I could control my father's choices. 3 days after the verdict, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since I was 17. The cemetery was quiet, dappled with late afternoon sunlight filtering through old oak trees. Her headstone was simple. Catherine Marie Whitmore, beloved wife and mother. I traced the letters with my fingertips. I kept my promise, I whispered. Remember how you always said to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard? I did that, Mom. I think you'd be proud. I placed fresh flowers by her grave and sat there for a long time, telling her everything about Eleanor, about law school, about the case, about how I still missed her every day. As I was leaving, my phone rang an unknown number. Is this Vivian Whitmore? A woman's voice asked. Yes, who's calling? This is Celeste. Her voice was different than I remembered, subdued, almost hesitant. I'd like to meet with you. In private, every instinct told me to refuse, but curiosity won out. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the courthouse, neutral territory. She was already waiting when I arrived, her perfect appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Dark circles shadowed her eyes despite careful makeup. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat across from her. I know you have no reason to trust me. Why am I here, Celeste? She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I want you to understand. I was a victim too in my way. I raised an eyebrow. Waiting. Your father, he has a way of making you feel special, chosen. I was 23 when I started working for him. He told me I had potential, that I was smarter than the others. She laughed hollowly. I thought I was in love with him. Maybe I was. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said. You moved into my mother's house before her side of the bed was cold. I know, she whispered. I know how it looked. But Alan, he can be very persuasive and very cruel when crossed. Is that supposed to make me feel sorry for you? No. She shook her head. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm offering information. The company is going under. The DA is investigating the charity funds, the ones in your mother's name. Alan's talking about leaving the country. Why tell me this? Because it's over. All of it. And, maybe I want to do one right thing before it all comes crashing down. She stood, gathering her purse. The baby isn't his, by the way. Your evidence was correct. I think on some level, he's always known. I watched her walk away. This woman I'd hated for so long. She wasn't a monster, just a flawed, complicated human who'd made terrible choices. Like my father. Like all of us, in our own ways. That evening, a package arrived at my apartment. A stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. The note attached read simply, found these while clearing Eleanor's things. She wanted you to have them when the time was right. Arthur Grimshaw. Eleanor had written me a letter every month during my years at college, saving them for after she was gone. Each one ended the same way. Fight smart, but love louder. I stayed up all night reading them, laughing and crying at her wisdom, her humor, her unflinching belief in me. In the last letter, dated just weeks before her death, she wrote, "Remember, child, pain can make you hard or it can make you wise. Choose wisdom, it's far more powerful and lasts much longer." The next morning, a different package arrived, a thin envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from my father. "Vivian, you've won. I hope that brings you satisfaction. Everything I built is being dismantled because you couldn't let go of the past. Your mother would be disappointed in what you've become: vindictive, cold, calculating. Just like me, it seems. Perhaps that's the real tragedy." I didn't read past the first paragraph. I dropped the letter into the trash and walked away. He still couldn't see beyond himself, beyond his own pain and justifications. Maybe he never would. Instead of dwelling on it, I channeled my energy into something constructive. Using part of my fee from Eleanor's case, I established a small scholarship fund in Eleanor's name for displaced youth needing educational support. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was reviewing applications for the first scholarship when Daphne burst into my apartment without knocking, waving her left hand frantically. "He asked," she squealed, flashing a diamond ring. "Jason finally asked." I looked up to hug her, genuinely thrilled. Daphne and Jason had been dating since our second year of law school, and their relationship was one of the few stable, healthy ones I'd witnessed up close. About time, I left. I was starting to think he'd never work up the courage. "I need you to be my maid of honor," she said, grabbing both my hands. "Please say yes." Tears sprang to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the simple, unexpected joy of being included in someone else's happiness. "Of course," I managed. "I'd be honored." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of legal forms. For years, I'd carried my father's name like an unwanted inheritance, Whitmore. It connected me to him, to his actions, to a family that had discarded me. It was time to choose my own name. I filled out the paperwork carefully. Vivian Catherine Whitmore would cease to exist. In her place would be someone new, someone of my own making. Vivian Ellen Park. I introduced myself at my next hearing, a pro bono case representing a teenage runaway fighting for emancipation. The judge glanced up from his papers. "I thought your name was Whitmore, counselor." "I've recently changed it, Your Honor," I explained, "to honor the women who truly shaped me." My new name felt right, a tribute to my mother, Catherine, whose middle name I'd kept as my own, and to Eleanor Park, who had saved me in every way that mattered. 6 months after the Whitmore Ventures case, I was invited to guest lecture at Hamilton University Law School. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of eager faces, I recognized myself in them. The hunger for justice, the belief that law could be a tool for good. "The law is powerful," I told them, "but it's also deeply human. It's created by people, interpreted by people, and ultimately, it serves people, or it should never forget the humanity behind every case number, every precedent, every ruling." After the lecture, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Miss Park, I don't know if you remember me, but we went to high school together." "I'm Mariah Bennett." I stared at her momentarily speechless. Mariah, my former best friend who had disappeared from my life when I needed her most. "I remember," I said finally. "I've been following your career," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "What you did in the Whitmore case was incredible." "Thank you. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened back then, for not standing up to my parents when they turned you away. I was a coward, and I've regretted it ever since." I studied her face, older now, more defined, with faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there at 17. We'd both grown up. We'd both been shaped by our choices and the choices others made for us. "Thank you for saying that," I said, surprising myself with how easily forgiveness came. "It was a difficult time for everyone. Could we maybe get coffee sometime?" she asked. "Catch up properly?" I nodded. "I'd like that." The Eleanor Moore case changed everything, not just for me, but for dozens of other victims of Whitmore Ventures. It became legal precedent in 3 subsequent fraud cases, cited as a landmark example of predatory business practices targeting vulnerable populations. I received interview requests from major outlets, but I turned most of them down. This wasn't about publicity for me. It was about the work. In the quiet evenings, I developed a new ritual, sitting on my small apartment balcony with a cup of tea, reading one of Eleanor's favorite books, Middlemarch. Their eyes were watching God, To Kill a Mockingbird. Her literary tastes had been eclectic and impeccable. "Peace isn't loud," she had written in one of her letters. "It's steady, like a heartbeat. You'll know you found it when you stop looking for it." On a crisp autumn day, I drove by my childhood home on a whim. The for sale sign in the yard was weathered, suggesting it had been there for months. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown. I pulled over and sat in my car, studying the place that had once been the center of my world. I could have gone inside, called the realtor, arranged a viewing, walked through those rooms one last time. Instead, I simply nodded to myself and drove on. That house belonged to a different life, a different me. Later that week, while organizing old files, I found a forgotten book at the bottom of a box, a collection of poetry my mother had given me for my 16th birthday. A folded note slipped from between the pages, her handwriting instantly recognizable. "My darling girl, on days when the world feels too harsh, remember this. Never let their silence shape your worth. Your voice matters. Your heart matters. You matter, not for what you achieve or who approves of you, but simply because you are. All my love always, Mom." I pressed the note to my chest, feeling her presence more strongly than I had in years. She'd known, somehow, known that I would need these words long after she was gone. The next morning, I stood in the rain outside my office building, letting the drops pelt my face. It reminded me of that funeral day so long ago. The cold, the gray, the bottomless grief. But this time, I lifted my face to the sky, welcoming the sensation. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't defined by what I'd lost or who had left me. I was defined by what I'd built, by the people I'd helped, by the woman I'd chosen to become. The final case file on Whitmore Ventures landed on my desk that afternoon. The criminal investigation was complete. Charges filed. Plea deals in process. I closed the folder and set it aside. It was done. My father wasn't my story anymore. I was. That evening, as sunset painted my apartment in gold, I thought about the long, winding path that had brought me here. From a frightened 17-year-old sleeping in a park to a lawyer fighting for others who had been silenced or discarded. From a girl desperate for her father's approval to a woman standing firmly in her own power. They had tried to define me with pain, but I had used that pain to build my name, my voice, my fire, and that fire would never go out. What would you sacrifice for justice? Your career, your name, or the last threads connecting you to who you once were? If this story of reclaimed power resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of those who refuse to remain footnotes in their own lives.